If you love gripping stories that pull you in and don't let go, you're in the right place. This is Mr. Gray Stories. The first thing people noticed that Tuesday morning wasn't the stack of reports waiting on their desks. It wasn't the announcement about the company's biggest contract. It wasn't even the sunrise spilling through the glass walls of Harper Neural Logistics in downtown Atlanta. It was Alana Pierce and CEO Elliot Harper walking through the front entrance together. They didn't look like two people returning from an early business meeting. They looked like two people who hadn't slept. Alana's navy blazer was creased as though she'd been wearing it all night. Her usually neat hair had slipped loose around her face. She carried her laptop bag over one shoulder, but her grip on it looked almost absent-minded, as if she were moving on instinct rather than energy. Beside her, Elliot Harper looked nothing like the composed executive every employee recognized. His shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly, his tie was missing. The faint shadow along his jaw told its own story. Anyone who worked for him knew Elliot never arrived at the office looking anything less than perfectly prepared. Today was different. Neither of them spoke as they crossed the lobby. The security guard greeted them. Alana managed a tired smile. Elliot nodded politely. That was all. The elevator doors slid open. The ride to the executive floor felt unusually quiet. No discussion about meetings, no review of schedules, no casual conversation, only silence. The kind of silence people notice. By the time the elevator reached the upper floors, 3 employees had already exchanged uncertain glances. Someone raised an eyebrow. Someone else looked away quickly. Nobody asked a question. Questions weren't necessary. Assumptions were already beginning to form. What nobody inside that building knew was that those 2 exhausted people had spent the entire night sitting on uncomfortable plastic chairs inside an emergency waiting room at Grady Memorial Hospital. For 6 long hours, watching nurses hurry past, listening every time the operating room doors opened, waiting to hear whether Alana's younger brother would survive emergency surgery. They hadn't shared dinner. They hadn't shared a hotel room. They hadn't shared anything except fear, exhaustion, and hope. But the truth had no witnesses. The silence did. And silence has a dangerous habit. It gives people permission to invent the rest. Welcome to Mr. Gray Stories. Here we tell the kind of stories that stay with you, stories that challenge you, comfort you, and sometimes even change you. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Before we go any further, take just a second to like this video and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. It may seem like a small thing, but it helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them. Have you ever tried to do the right thing, only to discover someone else had already written a completely different version of your story? Not because they knew the facts, because the facts were never as interesting as the assumptions. A reputation doesn't always disappear because someone proves you're wrong. Sometimes it begins to crack because enough people enjoy repeating the same version of events until it sounds true. That morning inside Harper Neural Logistics, nobody had evidence. Nobody had asked Alana where she'd been. Nobody had asked Elliot why he'd arrived looking exhausted. Yet conversations started anyway. Quiet ones, careful ones. The kind that begin with lowered voices and end with confident conclusions. By 10 o'clock, the whispers had reached another department. By 11, people were no longer asking questions. They were answering them for one another. Just before lunch, Human Resources received its first anonymous message. It wasn't long. It didn't contain proof. Only suspicion. Another message followed. Then another. One claimed the CEO had been giving special treatment to his operations director. Another insisted promotions had already been decided behind closed doors. Someone even wrote that they had seen everything. The strange part? Not one of them had actually seen anything that explained where Elliot Harper and Alana Pierce had spent the night. Still, certainty spread much faster than honesty. Less than 24 hours later, Alana stood quietly inside Elliot Harper's office. She placed a single envelope on his desk. Her resignation. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply believed leaving was the only way to protect both the company and her own dignity. Elliot opened the envelope, read every line, folded the letter with careful hands, then slid it back across the desk. His voice remained calm. I won't sign this. Not because he was trying to keep someone he cared about close. Not because he believed she couldn't be replaced. Because accepting that letter would tell everyone in the building one thing, that the rumors had been right all along. He refused to let a lie become company history simply because it had been repeated often enough. Neither of them realized that his decision would place both of their futures under even greater scrutiny. Because one night of simple human compassion was about to test an entire company's understanding of integrity, leadership, and truth. And before it was over, Almost everyone inside Harper Neurologistics would be forced to answer one uncomfortable question. When the truth finally arrives, will you have the courage to admit you were wrong? Atlanta had become the kind of city that rarely slept. Before sunrise, delivery vans were already threading through Midtown. Hospital loading docks buzzed with activity long before office workers reached their desks. Emergency rooms counted on supplies arriving exactly when they were needed, because a delay of 20 minutes could mean the difference between saving a life and losing one. Most people never stopped to think about how those supplies found their way across a city of millions. They only noticed when something was missing. At the center of that invisible network stood Harper Neurologistics. Occupying several floors inside a sleek glass building overlooking downtown Atlanta, the company had grown from a small technology startup into one of the country's fastest-growing AI-powered healthcare logistics firms. Its software didn't treat medicine like ordinary cargo. Every hour, it analyzed weather reports, interstate traffic, emergency room admissions, supplier inventories, seasonal illness trends, and thousands of other data points. It learned where shortages were most likely to happen before hospitals even realized they had a problem. When one hospital's supply of blood bags began running dangerously low, the system identified another facility with a safe surplus and calculated the fastest transfer route. When hurricanes threatened the southeast, it rerouted shipments days before highways closed. When children's hospitals suddenly needed additional ventilators during respiratory outbreaks, it found the nearest available units and coordinated transportation before administrators had finished making phone calls. Doctors often received critical equipment without ever knowing that an artificial intelligence platform had quietly predicted the need hours earlier. Inside Harper Neurologistics, nobody celebrated software. They celebrated the patients whose names they would never know. Every successful delivery meant another family might receive good news instead of heartbreaking news. That belief shaped everything about the company. It also explained the man whose name appeared on every office wall. Elliot Harper never wanted to become famous. He had wanted his mother to survive. 23 years earlier, she had suffered a severe allergic reaction while visiting Elliot's grandparents in rural Georgia. The nearest hospital had doctors ready. The nurses moved quickly. Everyone did everything they could. But one medication wasn't available. The hospital had run out. Another facility had the medicine they needed, but it arrived too late. Elliot was 16 years old when he watched his father sit alone outside the intensive care unit, staring at the floor because there was nothing else left to do. For years, that memory refused to leave him. People often described his company as an artificial intelligence success story. Elliot described it differently. To him, Harper Neurologistics existed because no family should ever lose someone simply because the right medicine couldn't reach the right place at the right time. That purpose never changed, neither did his standards. By 7:30 every morning, Elliot was already walking through every department before most executives had finished their first cup of coffee. He greeted receptionists by name. He thanked the overnight support teams before heading upstairs. If someone had solved a difficult logistics problem during the night, he noticed. If someone had struggled, he noticed that too. He believed leadership wasn't about catching people making mistakes. It was about making sure those mistakes never became disasters. His meetings always started exactly on time, not 1 minute early, not 1 minute late. He expected preparation. He expected honesty. Most importantly, he expected people to admit when they didn't know something instead of pretending they did. You can recover from being wrong, he often reminded new managers. You can't recover from hiding it. Employees respected him because he held himself to the same standards he demanded from everyone else. He never asked anyone to work harder than he worked himself. Still, there was something about him that naturally made people straighten their posture when he entered a room. Nobody feared being yelled at. They feared disappointing someone who genuinely believed their work mattered. On the opposite side of the city, another alarm clock rang at exactly 5:30 every morning. Alana Pierce was usually awake before it finished. She moved quietly through the modest brick home she shared with her widowed mother and younger brother, careful not to wake either of them before breakfast was ready. Coffee brewed while oatmeal simmered on the stove. She packed her own lunch before checking whether enough groceries remained for the week. Some mornings she reviewed company reports while waiting for toast to finish. Other mornings she helped her younger brother search for homework that somehow disappeared overnight. It wasn't glamorous, it was simply their routine. Years earlier, after her father's unexpected death, routines had become the only thing holding the household together. Her mother had done everything she could, but grief had changed more than emotions. Medical appointments became frequent. Working full-time became difficult. Without ever announcing it to anyone, Alana gradually stepped into responsibilities many people didn't carry until much later in life. She managed household bills. scheduled repairs, balanced grocery budgets, helped her younger brother prepare for school, made certain her mother never felt like a burden. She never complained, not because life was easy, because the people she loved needed stability more than they needed complaints. By the time she reached Harper Neurologistics each morning, most of her first job was already finished. Her second job was leading operations. As operations director, Alana wasn't the loudest person in meetings. She rarely interrupted anyone. She didn't chase attention or recognition. Instead, she built systems that prevented problems before they reached customers. When winter storms threatened transportation routes, she already had backup plans. When suppliers missed deadlines, she had alternatives ready. If employees needed help, they knew her office door remained open unless she was inside a client meeting. Her leadership style wasn't dramatic. It was dependable. Dependability, she believed, earned trust long before titles ever could. That quiet reliability eventually earned Elliot Harper's attention. Not because she asked for it. Because excellence is difficult to ignore. Their conversations almost always centered on work, delivery forecasts, hospital contracts, performance metrics, emergency planning. Neither lingered after meetings. Neither crossed professional boundaries. There was mutual respect built entirely on competence, nothing more. If Elliot requested a revised operations model by Thursday afternoon, Alana delivered it before Thursday morning. If Alana warned that a transportation schedule needed adjustment, Elliot listened before asking questions. Neither wasted words. Neither mistook professionalism for friendship. It was a working relationship built on trust, discipline, and shared purpose. Nothing about it encouraged gossip. Nothing about it invited speculation. And nothing about it suggested that, within days, nearly everyone in the company would misunderstand both of them. Late that Wednesday morning, a company-wide notification appeared on every employee's computer. Conference Room A, mandatory meeting, 11 o'clock. Conversations immediately filled the office. Some wondered whether a new acquisition was coming. Others guessed another expansion into additional states. By a few minutes before 11, every chair had been filled. Elliot stood at the front of the room. He waited until the conversations faded naturally. Then he smiled. It wasn't a smile people saw often. "I've been looking forward to this announcement for almost a year," he said. The room became perfectly still. "Our team has officially been awarded the Southeastern Integrated Hospital Network contract." For a heartbeat, nobody reacted. Then the room erupted. Applause echoed against the conference room walls. People stood. Some hugged. Others laughed in disbelief. The contract represented the largest agreement Harper Neurologistics had ever secured. Dozens of hospitals across the Southeast would soon rely on the company's technology to predict shortages, coordinate emergency deliveries, and improve patient care. Years of work had finally paid off. Elliot waited until the applause settled. "This belongs to every department," he said. "Engineering built the platform. Client services earned their trust. Finance kept us moving. Operations made impossible deadlines look ordinary." His eyes briefly found Alana among the crowd. She acknowledged the recognition with a small nod before returning her attention to the rest of the team. No speeches, no celebration about herself. That was simply who she was. Elliot looked around the room once more. "I've reserved the rooftop at a restaurant in Buckhead tonight. Every employee is invited. Bring your appetite. You've earned this." Another wave of applause filled the room. People immediately began talking about dinner plans, spouses, childcare, and who would finally relax after months of relentless preparation. For most of them, it would become the happiest evening they had experienced all year. No one inside that conference room could have imagined that before the next sunrise, one unexpected phone call would quietly alter the course of two lives. And the celebration everyone was already looking forward to would be remembered for something entirely different than success. The excitement from the morning meeting lingered long after everyone returned to work. Normally, Harper Neurologistics settled into a focused rhythm after major announcements. Keyboards clicked. Conference calls resumed. Analysts disappeared into dashboards and forecasts. Not today. People kept finding reasons to stop by each other's desks. "Can you believe we actually landed it? I heard we beat 3 national firms. My wife didn't believe me until I sent her the announcement." Months of pressure had finally given way to relief. Even the customer support team, usually buried under back-to-back calls, sounded lighter. Engineers who rarely left their workstations wandered into neighboring departments to congratulate colleagues. Someone ordered boxes of pastries for the entire office, and nobody bothered asking who had paid for them. For once, deadlines didn't feel heavy. They felt worthwhile. Inside his office, Elliot Harper stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Traffic crawled through the afternoon heat several stories below. His calendar remained full, but his attention drifted toward the framed photograph sitting on a shelf behind his desk. His mother. The picture had been taken during a family picnic years before the illness that changed everything. He didn't keep it there to remind himself of loss. He kept it there to remember the reason the company existed. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Alana stepped inside, carrying a tablet filled with revised implementation schedules. "I've updated the rollout timeline," she said. "The hospital network wants the first phase to begin 2 weeks earlier than expected." Elliot accepted the tablet and studied the changes. "You already solved the staffing issue. I spoke with every department manager after the meeting. You've been busy." She offered a modest smile. "They're excited. Nobody complained about the extra work. They usually don't when you're the one asking." Alana almost laughed. "I think they're excited about tonight." "So am I." He looked back at the schedule. "This gives us room if any supplier runs behind. I'd rather prepare now than apologize later." Elliot nodded. "Exactly." The conversation ended there. It always did. There was never unnecessary small talk, never awkward attempts to become friends, just two professionals focused on the same mission. As Alana turned toward the door, Elliot spoke again. "You should leave a little early this evening." She looked back. "The restaurant won't feel much like a celebration if the operations director arrives exhausted." "I'll try." "No," he replied with a faint smile. "Actually try." She smiled politely before leaving. It was a small exchange, but one that reflected the respect they had built over years of working together. Nothing more. By early evening, Buckhead looked exactly as it often did after the workday ended. Restaurants glowed beneath rooftop lights, patios filled with conversations. Music drifted through the warm Georgia air. Employees from Harper Neurologistics gradually arrived at the rooftop venue Elliot had reserved weeks earlier, long before he knew whether the contract would actually be theirs. Round tables overlooked the Atlanta skyline. Servers carried trays of appetizers between laughing groups of coworkers. People who had spent months communicating through spreadsheets and video meetings were suddenly telling stories about missed vacations, impossible deadlines, and coffee that had somehow become dinner more times than anyone wanted to admit. For the first time in months, everyone relaxed. Alana arrived wearing a simple emerald green dress beneath a light blazer, professional, comfortable, nothing designed to draw attention. Several coworkers waved her over immediately. "You made it! We were starting to think operations was still working." "It almost was," Alana admitted with a laugh. Someone handed her a sparkling water. Someone else insisted she try the appetizers before they disappeared. The conversations felt refreshingly ordinary. One engineer proudly introduced his fiancée. Another employee showed baby pictures that nearly everyone politely admired. A project manager joked that they deserved 2 contracts after surviving the last 6 months. Even Alana found herself laughing. It had been a long time since work felt this light. Across the rooftop, Elliot moved from table to table without dominating any conversation. He thanked the kitchen staff, shook hands with interns, congratulated department heads, asked employees about spouses, parents, children, and vacation plans. Leadership in his mind extended beyond boardrooms. People worked harder when they knew they mattered. As the evening settled in, someone tapped a glass with a spoon. The conversations gradually quieted. Elliot stood near the center of the rooftop, holding nothing more than a glass of iced tea. "I promised I'd keep this short," he began. A few people laughed. "So I'll do my best." His eyes moved across the crowd. "When people outside this company hear about today's contract, they'll probably assume one person made it happen." He shook his head. "That's never how meaningful work gets done." He pointed toward the engineering team. "You built tools that hospitals trusted. Toward customer success. You earned confidence, one conversation at a time. Toward finance. You protected every dollar so we could keep growing." Finally, he looked toward Alana. "And operations." He smiled. "You made impossible deadlines look ordinary." The applause started almost immediately. Alana lowered her eyes for a moment, clearly uncomfortable being singled out. Elliot noticed. "So if anyone deserves tonight," he lifted his glass toward the entire room, "it's every person standing here." Hundreds of glasses lifted together. The celebration continued. For a little while, the pressure of responsibility disappeared. Alana finally allowed herself to breathe. She stood near the edge of the rooftop overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretched across the horizon like tiny constellations. One of her coworkers stepped beside her. "You should celebrate more often." "I wouldn't know how." "That's exactly why." Alana smiled. "I'll work on it." Before another word could be exchanged, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her smile disappeared instantly. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered anyway. Hello? A hurried voice spoke from the other end. Is this Alana Pierce? Yes. My name is Denise. I'm one of the staff members at the Midtown Community Recreation Center. Alana's heartbeat quickened. What's wrong? Your brother collapsed during a basketball game a few minutes ago. The sounds around her seemed to disappear. Music, conversations, laughter. Everything became distant. He lost consciousness, the woman continued carefully. The paramedics are already here. They're taking him to Grady Memorial Hospital. Alana's fingers tightened around the phone. Is he awake? I'm sorry, I don't know. Her breathing became uneven. I'll be there. The call ended. She remained perfectly still. Asked if she was all right. She didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. She simply stared at the dark screen in her hand. Across the rooftop, Elliot noticed the change before anyone else did. One moment Alana had been smiling. The next, every trace of color had drained from her face. Without drawing attention, she picked up her bag and quietly started toward the exit. She hoped no one would notice, but Elliot already had. He excused himself from the group he was speaking with and caught up to her just before she reached the elevator. Alana. She turned quickly. I'm sorry, she said, trying to steady her voice. I have to leave. What happened? My brother. She swallowed hard. He collapsed. They're taking him to Grady. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. I'll drive you. No. Her answer came automatically. I'll call a rideshare. By the time one gets here, we'll already be halfway downtown. I can't ask you to leave your own celebration. You're not asking. Elliot, I'm driving. She looked at him for a long second, not because she doubted his sincerity, because accepting help had never come easily. She had spent years convincing herself she could carry everything alone. Tonight, she couldn't. She nodded once. Thank you. Together they stepped into the elevator. Neither of them noticed two employees walking out of the restaurant just as the elevator doors closed. Both looked toward the lobby, then quietly looked at one another. Neither said a word, not yet. Outside, Atlanta's evening traffic stretched ahead of them. Elliot unlocked his car. Alana climbed into the passenger seat, clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. As they pulled away from Buckhead, neither knew exactly what waited for them at the hospital. They only knew one thing. They needed to get there as quickly as possible. Minutes later, the emergency room doors closed behind them, and neither of them had any idea they wouldn't walk back out until the sun came up. The automatic doors of Grady Memorial Hospital slid open, and the noise of the city disappeared behind them. Everything inside moved with quiet urgency. Wheelchairs rolled across polished floors. Phones rang behind the reception desk. Doctors and nurses passed one another with practiced efficiency, exchanging quick updates before disappearing through secured doors. Alana hurried to the front desk before Elliot could even catch up. My brother, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. He was brought in from Midtown Community Recreation Center. His name is Mason Pierce. The receptionist typed quickly. He arrived a few minutes ago. They're evaluating him now. Can I see him? I'm sorry, the doctors are still working with him. Alana nodded, though it was obvious she had barely heard the answer. A nurse approached moments later. Are you his sister? Yes. The doctors believe he's experiencing internal bleeding caused by an undetected condition. They're preparing him for emergency surgery. The words landed one after another. Internal bleeding, emergency surgery. Alana instinctively reached for the edge of the counter to steady herself. Is he going to be okay? We're doing everything we can. It wasn't the answer she wanted. It was the only honest answer anyone could give. Within minutes, paperwork appeared in front of her. Consent forms, insurance information, emergency contacts. Questions she normally answered without thinking suddenly felt impossible. Her hands trembled as she tried to write. Without saying anything, Elliot gently pulled another chair beside her. I'll read them aloud, he said quietly. She looked at him. You answer. For the next several minutes, they worked through each document together. He never rushed her, never took control. He simply helped carry a burden that had suddenly become too heavy for one person. When the final signature was complete, a surgical nurse collected the forms. They're taking him in now. Alana watched as the double doors opened. For the briefest moment, she caught sight of Mason lying on the hospital bed. His face looked impossibly young. Machines surrounded him. Then the doors closed. Silence settled over the waiting area, a silence far louder than any conversation. The hours that followed refused to move at a normal pace. The digital clock above the reception desk seemed frozen. People came and went. Shift changes happened. Coffee cups emptied. Announcements echoed through the hallways. yet every minute felt longer than the one before it. Alana sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she never drank. She stared toward the operating room doors without blinking. Every time someone wearing surgical scrubs appeared, she immediately looked up. Every time they walked past without stopping, her shoulders quietly sank again. Elliot remained nearby, not because he believed his presence could change the outcome, because leaving never crossed his mind. Several times his phone vibrated inside his jacket. Board members, senior managers, employees asking questions about the celebration. He silenced every call. Finally, he sent one brief message to his executive assistant. "Family emergency. Cancel tomorrow morning's early meetings. I'll explain later." Nothing else. The company could wait. Tonight, another family needed someone to stay. Nearly 2 hours passed before Alana finally spoke. "I'm sorry." Elliot looked over. "For what? You shouldn't be here. I disagree. You've already done enough." "I don't think I have." She lowered her eyes. "I ruined your celebration." "You didn't ruin anything. The whole company was there. The company celebrated." She shook her head. "And you left because of me. I left because someone needed help." For the first time that night, Alana allowed herself to look directly at him. "You didn't have to." "No," he answered without hesitation. "I chose to." Another long silence followed, not uncomfortable, simply honest. Eventually Alana spoke again. "I've spent so much time making sure everyone else is okay." She stopped herself. "I don't really know how to let people help me. You don't have to learn it all tonight." A faint, tired smile appeared. "It still feels strange." "I know." She looked surprised. "You do?" Elliot leaned back in the plastic chair. "When my mother died." His voice remained calm but slower than before. "Everyone wanted to help." He looked toward the operating room doors. "I thanked them. I appreciated them. But I wouldn't let anyone carry any of it." He paused. "I thought accepting help meant admitting I couldn't handle things myself." Alana listened without interrupting. "It took me years to understand something." "What?" "Strength isn't measured by how much you carry alone." His words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They sounded like something he had learned the difficult way. Another hour slipped by. The vending machine became dinner. 2 bottles of water, 1 packet of crackers. Neither felt hungry. They simply knew they needed to eat something. Alana stared at the unopened crackers in her hands. "My dad used to coach Mason's basketball team." Elliot remained quiet, allowing her to continue. "When Dad passed away," she swallowed carefully. "Mason was only 9. Her voice almost disappeared. "He kept asking when Dad was coming home." She laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because some memories hurt too much to remember any other way. "My mother couldn't answer him. So I did." She looked down at the floor. "I promised him I'd always be there." She shook her head slowly. "Tonight, I wasn't. You couldn't have prevented this. I still should have been there. You were building a future for your family." She looked at him again. "And if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Elliot understood anyway. "He knows you love him." She nodded silently. Sometimes reassurance isn't about changing someone's fears. It's about reminding them what remains true even inside those fears. Just after 3 in the morning, a surgeon finally walked into the waiting room. Both of them stood immediately. The doctor's expression was serious. "The surgery was successful." Alana covered her mouth with both hands. "But every family learns to fear that word. The next 20 to 4 hours will be important." The doctor explained that Mason had a previously undiagnosed vascular condition that had used sudden internal bleeding during physical activity. The operation had stopped the bleeding. Recovery would take time. But he was alive. The relief came all at once. Alana closed her eyes as tears finally escaped. Not loud tears, not dramatic tears, simply the kind that arrive after hours of holding everything together. Without thinking, Elliot placed a reassuring hand lightly against her shoulder. Nothing more. No embrace, no dramatic moment, only quiet human kindness. Just before dawn, a nurse escorted Alana into the recovery unit. Mason remained asleep. Machines monitored every heartbeat. She gently held his hand. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I'm here." When she returned to the waiting room several minutes later, Elliot was standing near the window watching the first light appear over Atlanta. "You stayed. I said I would. You have work. So do you." She smiled for the first time since the phone call. "A lot of work." He glanced at his watch. "If we leave now, we'll have enough time to stop by your house." She looked uncertain. "You should change before coming to the office." You still think we should go to work? He smiled slightly. I know you. She laughed quietly. You really do. The drive across Atlanta felt very different from the frantic trip to the hospital. Morning traffic had not yet begun. The streets remained calm. Neither of them filled the silence with unnecessary conversation. Some experiences didn't require words. Elliot dropped Alana at her house just long enough for her to change clothes and reassure her mother that Mason was stable. 20 minutes later, they were back on the road. By the time they reached Harper Neurologistics, employees had already started arriving. The lobby looked ordinary, until the front doors opened. Conversations paused. Coffee cups stopped halfway to waiting mouths. A receptionist looked up from her computer. Two analysts standing beside the elevators exchanged quick glances. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. They saw the CEO arriving with the operations director just after sunrise. They noticed the exhaustion on both faces, the same clothes from the night before, the silence between them. No one knew about the emergency surgery. No one knew about the waiting room. No one knew about Mason. All they had was a picture with no explanation. And by lunchtime, people were no longer asking where Alana had been. They were quietly telling one another what they believed had happened. The workday should have returned to normal. Instead, something invisible settled over Harper Neurologistics. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same employees logged into the same systems. The same project deadlines remained. The same hospital implementation meetings filled everyone's calendars. Yet the atmosphere inside the building felt subtly different, not tense, curious. And curiosity, left unchecked, has a way of becoming its own form of entertainment. The first conversation started less than 15 minutes after Alana and Elliot entered the building. Two financial analysts happened to be waiting for coffee when one quietly leaned toward the other. Were they together? The second shrugged. Look that way. They arrived in the same car. I noticed. A brief silence followed. Neither wanted to sound judgmental. Neither intended to start a rumor. The first analyst finally laughed awkwardly. I'm probably reading too much into it. Probably. The conversation ended there. Or at least it should have. Unfortunately, conversations have a habit of continuing after the people who started them walk away. By 9 o'clock, someone in operations had heard that the CEO and the operations director had arrived together before sunrise. By 9:15, someone else believed they had left the company celebration together. By 9:30, another employee confidently stated they had spent the entire night together. No one mentioned the hospital. No one even considered it. The truth never entered the conversation because nobody realized there was another explanation. People simply filled the empty spaces with assumptions. Alana tried to focus on work. Her inbox had nearly 200 unread messages waiting after the previous evening's celebration. The new hospital contract required immediate planning, implementation schedules, supplier confirmations, regional staffing adjustments. Normally, work like this helped quiet her thoughts. Today, it didn't. She noticed small things. A conversation stopping as she entered the break room. Two coworkers lowering their voices near the printers. Someone smiling politely before looking away almost immediately. No one said anything openly. Everyone remained professional. Yet professionalism sometimes hides discomfort instead of eliminating it. When she stepped into the elevator with three coworkers, the discussion about weekend plans ended so abruptly that the silence almost became another participant in the ride. The doors opened. Everyone exited without finishing the conversation. Alana remained standing inside for another second after the hallway emptied. She quietly wondered whether she was imagining it. Stress had a way of making ordinary moments feel unusual. She chose to believe that explanation. It was easier. Across the building, Elliot had no idea any of this was happening. His morning disappeared beneath meetings with hospital executives, implementation timelines, budget approvals, technology demonstrations. The new contract demanded constant attention. Between meetings, he reviewed staffing projections prepared by Alana's department. As always, the work was thorough. Every potential obstacle already had a proposed solution. He smiled slightly. She had probably stayed up half the night finishing revisions. The irony escaped him. She had, in fact, stayed up all night, just not for work. Around mid-morning, the company's internal Slack channels became noticeably more active. Official project discussions continued as expected, but private messages quietly multiplied. Did you notice Elliot and Alana this morning? Maybe they were finishing client meetings. Client meetings until sunrise? Someone said they left together last night. Seriously? That's what I heard. Every message sounded uncertain. Nobody claimed absolute knowledge. Yet each person forwarded the conversation anyway. Not because they wanted to damage anyone. Because people naturally share mysteries before they share facts. Within an hour, the original uncertainty had almost disappeared. Instead of, I heard they might have. The language slowly changed. They definitely. I know someone who saw. It makes sense now. The details became more confident. The evidence became weaker. Just before lunch, Alana attended a planning meeting with representatives from 3 departments. Normally, discussions moved naturally around her. Today, something felt different. A project coordinator asked whether implementation deadlines might change. Alana answered. Another manager nodded politely. Then an uncomfortable silence followed. People exchanged quick glances before returning to their laptops. No one challenged her. No one questioned her authority. Still, the room no longer felt completely comfortable. As everyone packed their notebooks afterward, one employee accidentally left a phone face up on the conference table. A notification appeared. Private message. Do you think the rumors are actually true? The employee quickly picked up the phone before Alana could read anything else. He smiled awkwardly. Sorry. It's all right. She walked away without another word, but the message stayed with her. Rumors? About whom? About what? For the first time all morning, she felt something tighten inside her chest. The lunchroom had always been one of the friendliest places inside Harper Neurologistics. People from different departments mixed freely. Engineers shared tables with marketing teams. Interns laughed beside senior managers. It reflected the culture Elliot had worked hard to build. Today, conversations became noticeably quieter whenever certain people entered. Not silent, just careful. Alana collected a salad and found an empty table near the windows. Normally someone joined her within minutes. Today, chairs remained empty. Several coworkers waved politely from across the room. None came over. She told herself everyone was simply busy. She almost believed it. At another table, 2 employees spoke softly. I don't think we should assume anything. I'm not assuming. It doesn't look good. We don't know what happened. No. But everyone keeps saying the same thing. A third coworker looked up from his lunch. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about it. The table fell quiet. Not because anyone had reached the truth, because everyone suddenly realized they were discussing 2 real people. Early that afternoon, someone inside Human Resources noticed something unusual. An anonymous message had arrived through the company's ethics reporting system. The complaint contained no evidence, no documents, no witnesses, only a concern. There appears to be favoritism involving senior leadership and an executive employee. This may affect future promotions and company decisions. The HR specialist frowned. Anonymous reports were taken seriously. Even vague ones required documentation. She logged the complaint according to company policy, then returned to her work. 23 minutes later, another anonymous submission appeared. Different wording, the same concern. An hour later, a third. This time the complaint claimed multiple employees had witnessed inappropriate behavior. No names, no details, only confidence. The HR specialist leaned back in her chair. 3 anonymous complaints in a single afternoon, about the same issue. That had never happened before. She quietly opened a new case file. Outside her office, the company continued operating as though nothing had changed. Inside that digital folder, something far more dangerous had just begun. One anonymous complaint had reached Human Resources, then another, then another. The anonymous complaints remained invisible to almost everyone inside Harper Neurologistics, but their effects didn't. Over the next several days, nothing openly dramatic happened. Nobody confronted Alana. Nobody accused Elliot. No emails circulated making allegations. No meetings were interrupted by uncomfortable questions. On paper, the company continued operating exactly as it always had. Reality felt different. Rumors rarely announced themselves. They quietly alter the way people look at one another. Monday morning began with a video conference involving executives from one of the hospitals joining the newly signed Southeastern Integrated Hospital Network contract. Alana led the implementation presentation. She explained projected delivery timelines, emergency inventory forecasting, and the AI monitoring systems that would support each hospital during the rollout. She spoke with the same confidence she always carried into client meetings. Questions came. She answered each one clearly. The presentation concluded on schedule. As everyone prepared to disconnect, one hospital administrator smiled politely. Before we wrap up, he hesitated just long enough to make the room uncomfortable. I assume you'll be leading this project personally. Alana nodded. Yes. He glanced toward Elliot's video window. I suppose that makes sense. Elliot looked up. What do you mean? The administrator cleared his throat. Oh, nothing important. It sounded important. The man shifted awkwardly. I've simply heard you're especially supportive of Ms. Pierce. The conference room fell silent. Several participants looked down at their notes. Others pretended to adjust microphones that didn't need adjusting. Alana felt warmth rush into her face. Elliot's expression didn't change. "Our implementation assignments are based on qualifications," he replied evenly. "Ms. Pierce is leading this project because she earned it." The administrator immediately nodded. "Of course, I apologize if my wording came across poorly." The meeting ended moments later. Nobody mentioned the exchange again, but it followed Alana for the rest of the day. By Tuesday, the rumors had quietly reached people outside the company. No one knew exactly how. Perhaps a spouse repeated something overheard during dinner. Perhaps a former employee heard speculation from a friend. Perhaps someone simply enjoyed telling an interesting story. The source no longer mattered. The story had already begun traveling on its own. Inside the office, another subtle change unfolded. Conversations that once included Alana now paused when she approached. People remained courteous, professional, respectful. Yet an invisible distance had appeared. One afternoon she entered the break room just as three coworkers were laughing together. The laughter stopped. One of them smiled. "Hey, Alana." "Hi." She poured herself coffee. No one resumed the conversation. After a few quiet seconds, each person found a reason to leave. Alana remained standing beside the coffee machine long after the room emptied. She stared into her cup without taking a sip. The coffee wasn't what had gone cold. Something else had. The change became harder to ignore during planning sessions. Normally, department managers challenged one another's ideas openly. Healthy disagreement had always been part of Harper Neurologistics. Now people seemed strangely careful around Alana. Some avoided eye contact. Others agreed too quickly. A few stopped volunteering opinions altogether. It wasn't respect. It was uncertainty, and uncertainty can isolate someone even in a crowded room. One afternoon, Alana found herself reviewing implementation schedules with two project coordinators. When the meeting ended, she gathered her notebook and thanked everyone. As she reached the doorway, she heard someone whisper behind her, "I wonder if she'll become vice president next." A second voice answered quietly, "Would that really surprise you?" The first person didn't respond. Neither realized she had heard them. Alana kept walking. Her pace never changed. Only after reaching the privacy of her office did she close the door and allow herself to sit in silence. For several minutes she simply looked at the framed photograph on her desk. Her mother, Mason, a family picnic from years earlier, everything she had worked for, every late night, every missed holiday, every promotion earned one difficult project at a time. Could people really believe none of it mattered? Could years of honest work disappear because of one misunderstood night? She rested both hands against her forehead. For the first time in a very long while, she questioned whether she still belonged there. Across the building, Elliot finally noticed something wasn't right. Not because anyone reported a rumor. Because the culture of his company had begun changing. Employees who normally collaborated freely seemed unusually cautious. Meetings ended with less discussion than usual. Department heads appeared distracted. Even routine decisions required more reassurance than before. It wasn't dramatic. But it was different. And Elliot had spent too many years building the company not to recognize when something beneath the surface had shifted. He invited several senior managers into his office over the course of 2 days. None mentioned gossip directly. Each insisted everything was fine. Each conversation felt strangely incomplete. People answered his questions, just not all of them. The situation became impossible to ignore when another hospital executive requested a private call. After discussing implementation updates, the executive hesitated. "Elliot." "Yes?" "I debated whether to bring this up. I'm listening. There have been conversations." "What kind of conversations?" The executive chose his words carefully. "I've heard concerns from 2 different administrators." "About the rollout?" "No." A pause followed. "They're wondering whether internal decisions at Harper Neurologistics are being influenced by a personal relationship." Silence settled between them. Elliot leaned back slowly. "I see. I don't know whether any of it's true." "It isn't. I believed you'd say that, because it's the truth." "I know." The executive sighed. "I'm only telling you because I thought you'd want to hear it before the rumors spread any further." "I appreciate that." After the call ended, Elliot remained seated for several minutes. He replayed every interaction from the previous week. The celebration, driving Alana to the hospital, the waiting room, returning to work, the exhausted faces employees had undoubtedly noticed. Only then did he begin connecting details that had seemed unrelated. The quiet conversations, the strange atmosphere, the unusually cautious meetings. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. Not because people had asked questions, because no one had asked the right person. The following morning, Elliot requested a confidential meeting with the company's executive leadership team. No agenda accompanied the invitation. That alone surprised everyone. Around the conference table sat department leaders who had helped build Harper Neurologistics from its earliest years. Elliot looked around the room before speaking. "I want to ask a simple question." Nobody answered. "Has anyone noticed a change in this company's culture over the last week?" People exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, one senior manager spoke carefully. "There have been conversations." "What kind of conversations?" The manager hesitated. "I think you already know." "I want to hear it." Another executive quietly lowered her notebook. "There are rumors about you and Alana." The words remained in the room long after they were spoken. No one rushed to explain them, no one defended them, no one confirmed them. Elliot simply listened. Then he asked one final question. "Has anyone bothered asking either of us what actually happened that night?" No one answered, because no one had. The meeting ended sooner than anyone expected. As executives quietly left the room, Elliot remained standing beside the conference table. Outside his office, employees continued working. Inside another office several floors below, Alana sat alone after everyone else had gone home. The building had grown unusually quiet. She opened a blank document on her computer, looked at it for several moments, then slowly began typing. Not another report, not another implementation schedule, not another strategic plan. A resignation letter. The office looked very different after everyone had gone home. The conversations had disappeared. Computer monitors blinked softly across empty workstations. Cleaning crews moved quietly through the hallways. Outside, downtown Atlanta shimmered beneath the evening lights, but inside Harper Neurologistics, the building felt unusually still. Alana remained alone in her office. The blank document on her screen was no longer blank. She had rewritten the first sentence 6 times. Each version sounded wrong. Too emotional, too defensive, too personal. She deleted another paragraph and started again. Eventually, she stopped trying to explain herself. A resignation letter didn't require explanations, only decisions. She took a slow breath and continued typing. "Dear Mr. Harper, please accept my resignation as Operations Director effective immediately. I remain deeply grateful for every opportunity I have been given at Harper Neurologistics. Working here has been one of the greatest privileges of my professional life. However, I believe my continued presence may unintentionally damage the reputation of the company and distract from the important work our teams have accomplished together. For that reason, I believe stepping away is the most responsible decision. Thank you for your trust, your leadership, and the standards you have always expected from everyone fortunate enough to work here. Respectfully, Alana Pierce." She read the letter twice. There were no dramatic accusations, no anger, no mention of the rumors, no attempt to defend herself. That was intentional. If people had already decided who she was, another explanation probably wouldn't change their minds. She printed the letter, folded it carefully, placed it inside a plain envelope. Then she switched off the light in her office. The following morning arrived much too quickly. Employees greeted one another as they entered the building. Coffee machines hummed, phones began ringing. Meetings filled conference rooms. To everyone else, it looked like another ordinary day. To Alana, it felt like saying goodbye to a life she had spent years building. She walked more slowly than usual through the operations department. The analysts she had mentored were already discussing inventory models. A new coordinator she had personally interviewed waved and smiled. She smiled back. One final time. Her office looked exactly as she had left it. The framed photograph of her family still sat beside her computer. The bookshelf still held binders from projects completed years earlier. A handwritten thank you card from a former intern remained pinned to the bulletin board. "Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." She stared at it for several seconds, then quietly picked up the envelope. Elliot Harper was reviewing implementation reports when someone knocked gently on his office door. "Come in." Alana entered. She looked composed, almost too composed. Elliot immediately noticed the envelope in her hands. "What can I do for you?" She closed the door behind her. "I need a few minutes." He nodded. "You have them." She stepped forward and placed the envelope on his desk. "I'd appreciate it if you'd read this before saying anything." Something in her voice caused him to sit a little straighter. He opened the envelope, removed the letter, read every line without interruption. The office became completely silent. Alana stood with her hands loosely clasped in front of her. She had imagined this moment dozens of times the previous night. She expected questions, disappointment, perhaps even relief. Instead, Elliot simply finished reading. He looked at the final signature, then returned to the beginning and read the entire letter a second time. Neither of them spoke. Outside the office windows, employees crossed the hallway carrying laptops and coffee cups. Inside, time seemed to pause. Finally, Elliot folded the letter with deliberate care. He slid it back into the envelope, then pushed it across the desk toward her. I won't sign this. Alana looked down at the envelope. I wasn't asking you to agree. I know. I was informing you. I understand. She frowned slightly. Then why won't you accept it? Elliot rested both hands on the desk. Because it solves the wrong problem. It solves the company's problem. No, it protects Harper Neurologistics. It protects a rumor. She looked at him quietly. If I leave, the rumors don't disappear. They lose their reason to continue. They become believable. She shook her head. I don't follow. If you resign today, Elliot said calmly, everyone who has been whispering these last few days will think they were right. He leaned forward slightly. They'll assume the company quietly forced you out. They'll assume I accepted your resignation because there was something to hide. Alana looked away. I can't keep walking into meetings wondering who's judging me. You shouldn't have to. I can't keep wondering whether every promotion I've earned suddenly belongs to gossip instead of hard work. You earned every promotion. I know that. Her voice softened. But knowing it isn't making this any easier. The honesty in that sentence lingered between them. She wasn't angry. She was tired. Tired of walking into rooms that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Tired of questioning conversations that never used to matter. Tired of wondering whether years of integrity could really be erased by one misunderstanding. Elliot understood more than she realized. I need you to answer one question. She nodded. If none of these rumors existed, would you still resign? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared through the office window toward the operations floor. People were already beginning another busy workday. The department she had helped build, the team she genuinely cared about. Quietly, she shook her head. No. Then this isn't your decision. She looked back at him. It doesn't feel like anyone else's either. It became mine the moment those rumors started affecting your reputation. She folded her arms gently. I don't want special treatment. And you won't receive it. I don't want people thinking you're protecting me. I'm protecting something much larger than one employee. She waited. The integrity of this company. His voice remained measured. When people begin making decisions based on assumptions instead of facts, every person who works here becomes vulnerable. He paused before continuing. Today it's you. Tomorrow it could be someone else. If I allow an innocent employee to resign because of office gossip, I've taught everyone in this building that lies are powerful enough to decide careers. The room fell silent again. Alana had spent the last several days expecting sympathy. She hadn't expected principle. Elliot wasn't asking her to stay because she was indispensable. He wasn't making emotional promises. He wasn't pretending everything would somehow fix itself. He was refusing to reward dishonesty. There was a difference, a very important one. I don't know if I have the strength to keep doing this. You don't have to carry it alone. The words reminded her of the hospital waiting room. For a brief moment, the exhaustion she had been hiding returned to her face. What if none of this ever goes away? Elliot answered without hesitation. Then we deal with the truth. And if people don't believe it, that isn't something we can control. He stood from his chair. What we can control is whether we allow falsehoods to become official decisions. He gently placed the envelope back in front of her. I'm not signing your resignation. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not because I don't respect your decision, but because accepting it would tell everyone that integrity gives way whenever enough people repeat the same story. Alana slowly picked up the envelope. Not because she had changed her mind, because she realized he had. He had already decided what kind of leader he intended to be, even if it became difficult, even if it carried personal consequences. She gave a small nod. I understand. I hope one day everyone else will too. She turned toward the door. Before opening it, she paused. Thank you. She hesitated. For believing me without asking for proof. Elliot's expression softened. I never needed proof. I was there. She left the office carrying the same envelope she had brought inside. As the door closed quietly behind her, she still believed her future at Harper Neurologistics was coming to an end. She simply didn't know when. Elliot remained standing for several moments. Then he reached for the phone on his desk. Could you ask Human Resources to come to my office? A brief pause. Yes, immediately. Several minutes later, the head of Human Resources entered. Elliot closed the office door before speaking. I want a formal investigation opened. The HR director looked surprised. Into what exactly? Everything. The rumors, the anonymous complaints, the timeline, the facts. He met her eyes steadily. No assumptions. No shortcuts. No protecting reputations. Find the truth. Because if this company was going to move forward, it would do so based on evidence, not whispers. The Human Resources conference room had never felt so quiet. There were no raised voices, no accusations, no angry meetings, just a single case file resting on the center of the table. Across its cover, one sentence had been typed in plain black letters: Formal Workplace Conduct Review. The title alone made everyone uncomfortable, not because anyone believed misconduct had occurred, because no one knew what the investigation would uncover. The HR director looked around the table at the small review team assembled that morning. "We're not here to prove rumors," she paused deliberately. "We're here to determine whether the rumors are true." The distinction mattered. One searched for confirmation, the other searched for facts. Harper Neural Logistics had always prided itself on making decisions supported by evidence rather than assumptions. Now the company would have to prove it believed its own values. Word spread quickly that Human Resources had begun a formal review, not because anyone announced it, because employees noticed unusual requests arriving throughout the morning. Security received an email asking for building access records. The Information Technology Department was asked to preserve communication logs from the evening of the Buckhead celebration. Facilities management was instructed not to overwrite surveillance footage from the previous week. Nobody said why. People guessed anyway. The whispers didn't disappear. They simply changed direction. Alana learned about the investigation from the official HR notification delivered to her office. She read the letter carefully. It explained that the company had opened a formal review regarding anonymous workplace complaints. She was invited to participate voluntarily. She could bring documentation. She could answer questions. She would receive updates throughout the process. The language remained respectful, professional, impartial. Still, holding the letter in her hands made her stomach tighten. For several minutes she remained seated without moving. Being investigated, even as a witness, felt strangely painful. Not because she had done anything wrong. Because she had spent years building a reputation she suddenly found herself defending. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. It was one of her operations managers. "Do you have a minute?" Alana immediately placed the letter inside a drawer. "Of course." The manager asked 3 questions about delivery schedules. They reviewed staffing assignments. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. Business continued, exactly as it had every other day. Yet after the manager left, Alana noticed something she never had before. She had hidden the HR letter, not out of guilt, out of embarrassment. That realization hurt more than she expected. Across the building, Elliot refused to involve himself in the investigation. He had started it. Now he intended to stay away from it. When the HR director stopped by his office asking whether he wished to review evidence as it became available, he shook his head. "No." "You don't want updates? I'll answer a question you're required to ask." He folded his hands together. "But I won't influence your conclusions." She studied him for a moment. "Even if the findings affect you personally?" "Especially then." He understood something many leaders struggle to accept. A fair investigation cannot feel directed by the person at the center of it. If the truth cleared him, it had to do so on its own, not because he occupied the corner office. The review began with the simplest evidence. Electronic badge records. Every employee entering Harper Neural Logistics used the same security system. Every arrival, every departure, every after-hours entry, every weekend visit. The timestamps couldn't be edited without leaving a digital trail. Security exported the records. The review team placed them beside the timeline created from anonymous complaints. The comparison immediately raised questions. Several complaints suggested Elliot and Alana had remained inside the office together after the celebration. The badge records showed something entirely different. Both had exited the building within minutes of each other shortly after leaving the Buckhead event. Neither returned until the following morning. That alone disproved one version of the rumor, but it still didn't answer the obvious question: where had they gone? Next came the parking garage cameras. The surveillance footage showed employees gradually leaving after the celebration. Several vehicles exited one after another. Then Elliot's car appeared. Alana entered the passenger side. The vehicle left the garage. Nothing unusual followed. No stops, no detours inside the company property. The cameras recorded only what happened there. Nothing beyond it. One investigator quietly noted the departure time. Another added it to the growing timeline. The facts were beginning to replace speculation, piece by piece. The review expanded. Information technology retrieved company-issued GPS logs from Elliot's executive vehicle. Harper Neural Logistics equipped its fleet with tracking software for insurance and security purposes. The data showed the exact route taken that evening. Buckhead, southbound, downtown Atlanta, Grady Memorial Hospital. Arrival time matched the emergency department entrance records almost exactly. The investigators looked at one another. No one spoke immediately. One of the anonymous complaints had claimed the two spent the night at a private hotel. The GPS data eliminated that possibility entirely. Still, company policy required independent confirmation. Digital records alone were not enough. Interviews began that afternoon. Employees were invited individually. No one was treated like a suspect. The purpose remained simple: determine what people actually knew, not what they had heard. The answers followed a remarkably similar pattern. I saw them leave together. I heard someone mention they came back together. I assumed, I thought, I was told. Each interview revealed something important. Almost nobody possessed first-hand knowledge. Most accounts traced back to another conversation, another assumption, another person. The rumors had spread rapidly. Their foundation had not. One employee finally admitted something the review team had quietly suspected all along. I never saw anything inappropriate. The HR investigator looked up. So why did you believe it? The employee stared at the table. I guess. He hesitated. Because so many people were saying the same thing. The investigator made one final note. Repetition had become mistaken for evidence. Late that afternoon, the HR director reviewed the growing file: badge records, security footage, GPS logs, employee interviews. Every new document pointed toward one unavoidable conclusion. Something significant had happened that night. Just not what anyone imagined. Only one major gap remained. The destination had been identified. The timeline had been established. Now the investigation needed independent confirmation from the place Elliot and Alana had actually gone. The HR director picked up the phone. She contacted Grady Memorial Hospital through the administrative office and explained that Harper Neurologistics was conducting a confidential workplace review. Because medical privacy laws protected patients, she requested only information the hospital was legally permitted to verify. Nothing more, nothing less. The administrator listened carefully, promised to review the request with the appropriate department, and said someone would return the call as soon as possible. The HR director thanked her and ended the conversation. She had barely placed the receiver back on its cradle when it rang again. The caller ID displayed the hospital's number. Everyone in the room looked toward the phone. The administrator had called back much sooner than anyone expected. The human resources director answered the phone and switched it to speaker. No one around the conference table said a word. "This is Harper Neurologistics." A calm voice responded. "This is Grady Memorial Hospital Administration. I believe you requested verification regarding an incident from last Thursday evening." "Yes," the HR director replied. "We're conducting an internal workplace investigation. We understand there are legal limits regarding patient privacy." "There are. We're not requesting medical records." "I appreciate that." The administrator continued. "We cannot discuss the patient's diagnosis, treatment, or confidential medical information." "Understood. But we can verify whether specific individuals were present inside our facility during the time frame you've provided." The HR director picked up her pen. "We'd appreciate that. I've already reviewed the visitor documentation with our emergency department." Another brief pause followed. "Our records confirm that Elliot Harper and Alana Pierce arrived together at the emergency department shortly after 10 o'clock that evening." Around the conference table, pens stopped moving. The administrator continued. "They remained inside the hospital throughout the night. They did not leave the facility. They were present during emergency surgery involving Ms. Pierce's younger brother." No one interrupted. "They departed shortly after sunrise." The room remained completely silent. The administrator spoke once more. "Several members of our emergency staff remember them. Not because they caused any disruption, but because they spent nearly 6 consecutive hours in the family waiting area." The HR director quietly thanked her. "You've been very helpful. I'm sorry your company has had to investigate something like this. So are we." The call ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Not because there were still questions, because the answer had been far simpler than anyone expected. Company policy required independent documentation whenever outside information influenced an investigation. The HR director asked one of the investigators to visit Grady Memorial Hospital that afternoon, not to challenge the hospital's statement, to properly document it. The review had to withstand scrutiny. If employees questioned the outcome later, the evidence needed to speak for itself. The emergency department supervisor welcomed the investigator into a small administrative office. "We've already prepared the records we're legally allowed to release." A folder rested neatly on the desk. Inside were visitor registration logs, arrival timestamps, departure records, security verification forms. No medical details. Only information confirming who entered the emergency department and when. Every time matched the timeline already established through badge records and GPS tracking. The investigator thanked her. I understand there were staff members who interacted with them that evening. There were. Would they be willing to confirm what they personally observed? As long as we remain within privacy regulations. A charge nurse joined them a few minutes later. She immediately remembered the night. I remember Miss Pierce. What do you remember? She looked terrified. The nurse answered without hesitation. She kept asking whether her brother was going to survive. And Mr. Harper? He stayed. That's what stood out. The investigator looked up. Can you explain? We see family members stay. She smiled gently. We don't often see employers stay. He never asked for special treatment. He never demanded updates. He simply sat beside her. The nurse thought for another moment. I remember bringing them coffee around 2 a.m. They hadn't eaten. They thanked every member of our staff. She shrugged softly. Honestly, they were exactly the kind of people you hope families become during difficult nights. Nothing more needed to be said. Before leaving the hospital, the investigator met briefly with the emergency department receptionist who had been working that night. She opened the visitor log. I checked both of them in. She pointed toward the timestamps. They arrived together. I remember because Miss Pierce was shaking so badly she struggled to complete the admission paperwork. What happened then? Mr. Harper helped read the forms while she answered. Did they leave the hospital at any point? No. Did they ask for a private room? No. Did they spend the night anywhere other than the waiting area? No. The receptionist smiled sadly. I wish the reason people remembered that night had been happier. Back at Harper Neurologistics, the investigation reached its final stage. Every piece of evidence was placed side by side. Electronic badge records, security camera footage, vehicle GPS reports, visitor registration logs, hospital confirmations, witness interviews. The complete timeline stretched across an entire conference table. The anonymous complaint sat beside it. For the first time, everyone involved could compare assumption with reality. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The rumors described secret meetings. The evidence showed emergency medical care. The rumors suggested favoritism. The evidence showed compassion during a family crisis. The rumors implied deception. The evidence documented transparency at every measurable step. No reasonable conclusion remained. The allegations simply weren't true. The HR director submitted the completed findings to Elliott and the company's board ethics committee simultaneously. Neither received special treatment. The report spoke for itself. Later that afternoon, employees received a company-wide email requesting attendance at a brief all-staff meeting the following morning. No explanation accompanied the invitation. Predictably, speculation returned. What do you think it's about? Maybe the investigation. Do you think someone got fired? I have no idea. This time, however, very few people sounded confident. The investigation had quietly reminded everyone how dangerous confidence could become when it wasn't supported by facts. The following morning, every department gathered inside the largest conference room. Conversations remained unusually quiet. Elliott stood near the front. The HR director stood beside him. Alana sat among the operations team rather than at the front of the room, exactly where she wanted to be. The HR director addressed everyone first. Our investigation has concluded. No one moved. We examined electronic records, security documentation, interviews, and independent third-party verification. She looked around the room. We found no evidence whatsoever of misconduct involving Elliott Harper or Alana Pierce. Another pause. We did find overwhelming evidence that both individuals spent the evening in the emergency department at Grady Memorial Hospital because Ms. Pierce's younger brother required emergency surgery. The room became remarkably still. Several employees lowered their eyes. Others stared toward the floor. One person quietly covered their mouth. No one looked toward Alana. Not immediately. The weight of misplaced assumptions settled over the room without anyone needing to describe it. The HR director continued. The investigation is closed. Our findings are final. She stepped away from the podium. Silence remained. After the meeting ended, employees slowly began leaving the conference room. Some walked directly back to work without saying a word. Others hesitated near the doors. One young analyst approached Alana cautiously. I owe you an apology. She looked up. I shouldn't have believed what I heard. Alana offered a tired smile. Thank you. He nodded once and quietly walked away. A few minutes later, another employee stopped beside her. I'm sorry too. Throughout the afternoon, several more apologies followed. Some sincere, some awkward, some obviously rehearsed. Each one mattered, not because they erased the past, because admitting a mistake requires its own kind of courage. Not everyone apologized. Some employees avoided eye contact entirely. Others convinced themselves they had never contributed to the rumors in the first place. A few simply continued working as though nothing had happened. People respond to accountability differently. That, too, is part of being human. By late afternoon, Harper Neurologistics had officially cleared both Elliot Harper and Alana Pierce. The investigation was over. The truth had finally been heard. But as Elliot quietly closed the investigation report inside his office, he knew clearing their names was only the beginning, because restoring trust required more than proving innocence, and he had already decided the company would never return to business exactly as it had before. The investigation was over. The official report occupied less than 40 pages. It contained timestamps, security records, interview summaries, hospital verification, recommendations. The conclusions themselves took less than a page. No evidence of misconduct, no abuse of authority, no violation of company policy. For most organizations, that would have marked the end of the matter. For Elliot Harper, it marked the beginning of a much more difficult decision. He sat alone in his office after everyone had left for the evening, the investigation report open on his desk. His name had been cleared. Alana's name had been cleared. Yet every time he looked through the pages, one uncomfortable truth kept returning. The rumors had not spread because the company lacked evidence. They had spread because the company's structure allowed people to question whether fairness truly existed. Even though every promotion Alana had received had been earned, she still reported directly to him. That reporting line had existed for years without issue. Now it had become something people could point at, even when they were wrong. He leaned back in his chair and looked toward the Atlanta skyline. Sometimes leadership wasn't about correcting mistakes. Sometimes it meant changing systems that had never actually failed, not because they were broken, because trust demanded something stronger than being technically correct. The following morning, Elliot requested a meeting with the board of directors. Several members joined in person. Others connected through secure video conference. Everyone had already received the investigation report. One board member spoke first. "I'm relieved the allegations were unfounded." "So am I," Elliot replied. Another director smiled. "Fortunately, we can finally put this behind us." Elliot remained quiet for a moment. "I don't believe we should." Several heads lifted. "The investigation proved we acted appropriately. It proved something else, too." The room waited. "Our policies protected the company." He paused. "They didn't protect employee confidence." One director folded his hands. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm recommending we restructure executive reporting." The room became noticeably quieter. "You want to reorganize the leadership team because of false rumors?" "I want to remove every reasonable opportunity for future misunderstandings." Another board member frowned slightly. "Elliot, the investigation cleared both of you." "I know." "Then why should either of you pay the price?" He answered almost immediately. "Because leadership isn't about proving you're innocent. It's about protecting the people who trust your decisions." The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Some directors worried restructuring would appear as though the rumors had been true. Others believed changing nothing might create similar problems in the future. Every viewpoint received careful consideration. Elliot never raised his voice, never argued emotionally. He simply returned to one principle. If employees question whether opportunities are earned fairly, we have an obligation to remove the doubt, not because gossip deserves validation, because transparency deserves protection. Eventually, the chair of the board spoke. "What exactly are you proposing?" Elliot opened a prepared document. "Effective immediately, the operations division will report to the chief operating officer instead of directly to the CEO." He turned another page. "Performance evaluations for executive leadership positions will be conducted by an independent committee rather than a single executive." Another page. "Future promotions involving senior leadership will require documented multi-level review." He looked around the room. "These changes don't exist because someone behaved improperly. They exist because fairness should never depend on public opinion." After several minutes of discussion, the board voted unanimously. The restructuring was approved. Later that afternoon, Elliot invited Alana into his office. She entered carrying a notebook. "I assumed this was about implementation." "It is." She looked slightly confused. He handed her a folder. Inside was the board's restructuring resolution. She read each page slowly. When she reached the end, she looked up. "You're no longer my direct supervisor." "No, and this wasn't your decision alone. The board approved it this morning." She remained silent while reading the document again. "This changes a lot. It changes reporting relationships." She met his eyes. "It changes your responsibilities. A little. It changes mine. It protects yours." Alana carefully closed the folder. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. I've already been cleared. So have I. Then why? Elliot smiled faintly. Because I don't want another employee to wonder whether they have to resign just to defend their reputation. The words stayed with her. She realized he wasn't trying to repair what had happened between the two of them. He was trying to improve the company for everyone who came after them. That distinction mattered, more than she could easily express. Thank you. He nodded once. No one should have to choose between their career and their dignity. The restructuring brought practical changes almost immediately. Alana began reporting directly to the newly assigned executive leader. Project approvals followed revised procedures. Performance reviews involved multiple decision-makers. Promotion recommendations required written documentation from independent committees. Some employees initially considered the new process more complicated. Within weeks, most appreciated how transparent it had become. Questions that once relied on assumptions now had clear answers. The company had learned something valuable. Trust grows stronger when fairness is visible. 3 months later, another leadership review took place. This time, Elliot wasn't involved. The independent committee evaluated candidates for a newly expanded senior vice president of operations position. Every applicant submitted identical documentation, performance metrics, leadership evaluations, project outcomes, peer feedback, client satisfaction reports. The committee spent 2 full days reviewing every file. At the end of the process, their recommendation was unanimous. Alana Pierce, not because of sympathy, not because of recent events, because no other candidate demonstrated the same combination of operational excellence, leadership consistency, and employee trust. When the announcement became official, the response inside Harper Neural Logistics felt very different from previous weeks. The applause wasn't cautious, it was genuine. People stood. Several members of the operations team smiled proudly. One employee quietly whispered, "She earned every bit of this." This time, no one disagreed. Life gradually settled into a new rhythm. The rumors faded. The investigations became company history. Employees focused once again on hospitals, technology, and patient care. Alana embraced her expanded responsibilities with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown. The promotion never changed how she treated people. She still learned interns' names, still answered questions patiently, still stayed late whenever a struggling team needed support. Elliot noticed all of it. From a respectful distance, they continued working together, attending leadership meetings, discussing strategy, reviewing contracts, nothing more, nothing less. Professional boundaries remained exactly where they belonged, not because either of them lacked respect for the other, because that respect had become even stronger. Neither wanted anything to diminish it. Months passed. Atlanta moved through another season. The company continued growing. Mason recovered steadily and returned to school, grateful for the second chance he had been given. Alana finally found herself sleeping through the night again. For the first time in months, life felt ordinary. Neither she nor Elliot expected to see one another outside the office. There had never been a reason. Until one quiet Saturday morning, when chance quietly arranged something neither of them had planned, and for the first time since the hospital waiting room, their conversation would happen somewhere neither of them worked. Nearly 8 months had passed since the investigation closed. Time had done what it often does. It hadn't erased what happened. It had simply given people enough distance to see it more clearly. Inside Harper Neural Logistics, the conversation had returned to innovation, hospital partnerships, and patient care instead of speculation. The restructuring approved by the board had become part of everyday business. Employees no longer questioned reporting relationships because every promotion, evaluation, and leadership decision followed transparent procedures. The company felt steadier, healthier, not because difficult things never happened, because people had learned how much damage assumptions could cause. Alana Pierce had settled comfortably into her new role as Senior Vice President of Operations. The promotion hadn't changed her routines. She still arrived before most of the office. She still preferred walking through departments instead of sending unnecessary emails. She still knew the names of receptionists, interns, warehouse coordinators, and security officers. Leadership to her remained personal. Titles simply changed where she sat during meetings. Nothing more. Across the building, Elliot Harper had quietly stepped away from many day-to-day operational decisions. That had been intentional. The restructuring wasn't merely policy. It was something he chose to live by. Instead of reviewing every operational report himself, he focused on long-term partnerships with hospitals, research institutions, and universities exploring how artificial intelligence could improve healthcare logistics across the country. His schedule looked different now. Less crowded, less reactive. For the first time in years, he occasionally found himself with something unusual. Free Saturdays. One Friday afternoon, His executive assistant placed a folder on his desk. "You accepted this invitation a few months ago." Elliot looked up. "What invitation?" She smiled. "The Atlanta Future STEM Initiative." He opened the folder. The program connected professionals with middle school and high school students interested in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Several local companies had volunteered mentors. Harper Neurologistics had agreed to participate. "I completely forgot. You've been slightly busy." He laughed quietly. "That's fair." She pointed toward the schedule. "Your session starts tomorrow morning." He closed the folder. "I'll be there." Saturday arrived, carrying the kind of pleasant spring weather Atlanta residents waited for all winter. Families filled public parks. Children raced between food trucks. Volunteers unloaded tables covered with robotics kits, engineering models, computer displays, and science projects. Students wandered excitedly from one demonstration to another, asking questions adults happily answered. The atmosphere felt hopeful. Nobody cared about job titles. Nobody discussed quarterly reports. Everyone simply wanted young people to discover possibilities they had never imagined before. Elliot arrived carrying a box of demonstration equipment donated by Harper Neurologistics. A volunteer directed him toward the technology exhibition area. "Your table is beside the community robotics workshop." Perfect. He spent nearly 20 minutes arranging demonstration screens, explaining how predictive logistics helped hospitals prepare before emergencies happened. Students quickly gathered. One teenager asked how artificial intelligence predicted medical shortages. Another wanted to know whether robots would eventually replace doctors. Elliot answered each question patiently. Watching young minds become curious reminded him why education mattered. It also reminded him why he had started the company in the first place. Helping people always began with giving them opportunities to learn. A familiar voice drifted across the exhibit area. "Excuse me, could someone help us carry these boxes?" Elliot turned instinctively. Several volunteers were unloading materials from a van parked nearby. Standing beside them was Alana. For a brief second, neither moved. Not because the moment felt awkward, because neither expected the other to be there. Alana smiled first. "I wasn't expecting to see you." "I was about to say the same thing." She adjusted one of the boxes in her arms. "I've volunteered here for 3 years. I had no idea. I usually work with the robotics students." Elliot looked around. "My company sponsors part of the event." She laughed softly. "I know." "You do?" I saw the banner. He looked behind him. The Harper Neurologistics logo stretched across the back of his display. "I probably should have noticed that." "You've had a busy morning." "So have you," one of the volunteers interrupted. "Sorry to interrupt, but could someone take these programming kits inside?" "I've got them," Elliot answered immediately. "So do I," Alana said. Without another thought, they carried the boxes together toward the exhibition hall. The walk felt surprisingly comfortable. Not forced, not overly careful. Months had passed since their last conversation outside formal meetings. The silence between them no longer carried the weight it once had. As they finished arranging equipment, children flooded into the room. Within minutes, both became busy helping students build simple robotic vehicles designed to navigate miniature obstacle courses. A 12-year-old proudly held up a robot that immediately drove backward instead of forward. "I think it's confused," Alana laughed. "Robots usually do exactly what we tell them." The student frowned. "But I told it to go forward. You probably told it backward by accident." The student stared at the wiring. "Oh," several adults nearby laughed with him. Even Elliot couldn't hide a smile. "That's engineering. Sometimes your biggest mistake becomes your best teacher." The student nodded seriously. "I'll remember that." Watching Alana interact with the students surprised Elliot. She possessed the same calm patience she showed inside boardrooms. Only here, it appeared lighter, more relaxed. The children clearly trusted her. They weren't intimidated by her leadership. They were encouraged by it. Later that afternoon, the students broke for lunch. Volunteers finally had a chance to sit down. Alana carried 2 bottles of water toward a shaded picnic table. "Mind if I join you?" "I was hoping you would." She sat across from him. For a few moments, they simply watched families enjoying the event. "It feels different seeing everyone outside work," Elliot admitted. "It does. I don't think I've ever seen you without a laptop." She laughed. "I was thinking exactly the same thing about you." He smiled. "I left it in the car." "I'm impressed." "You." "My phone has been in my bag all morning." "That's even more impressive." They both laughed. The conversation flowed naturally now. Not because they suddenly knew everything about one another, because the professional walls that once defined every interaction were no longer necessary. Eventually, Elliot asked, "How's Mason doing?" Her expression immediately softened. "He finished physical therapy last month. That's wonderful. He still gets frustrated that his doctors won't let him play competitive basketball again." "I can understand that. But," she smiled proudly, "he's coaching younger kids now." "Really?" "He says helping someone else enjoy the game is almost as rewarding." Elliot nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like him." "What about you?" She asked the question gently. "You spend less time hiding in your office these days." "I've been told that." "Is it true?" "It is. I finally accepted that running a company doesn't require attending every meeting." "And how's that going?" He looked toward the students building robots nearby. "I'm remembering there's a life outside conference rooms." She smiled. "I think your company benefits from that too." "I hope so." A comfortable silence settled between them. Not the silence of uncertainty, the silence of people who no longer felt pressure to fill every moment with conversation. As the afternoon came to an end, volunteers began packing equipment. Students thanked mentors before leaving with their families. Neither Elliot nor Alana seemed eager to rush away. Standing beside the parking area, Elliot hesitated. "I've enjoyed today." "So have I. We should probably stay in touch." She looked at him for a second, not evaluating him, simply recognizing something had quietly changed. Months earlier, exchanging personal contact information would have raised difficult questions. Now, there was no reporting relationship, no professional imbalance, only mutual respect between two people whose lives had unexpectedly crossed again. Alana reached into her bag. "I don't think Human Resources has any policies against this anymore." Elliot laughed. "I'm fairly certain they don't. They exchange personal phone numbers. No promises, no expectations, just two people choosing to remain part of each other's lives for the first time. Neither realized that one simple exchange would become the beginning of something neither of them had ever tried to force, and perhaps that was exactly why it finally felt right. The first message didn't arrive until 4 days later. It wasn't long. "Elliot, I hope the robotics competition survived our coaching." Alana smiled before answering. "Alana, barely. One team insisted duct tape could solve every engineering problem." A reply appeared almost immediately. "Elliot, honestly, that's how half of my first business ideas worked." She laughed out loud. Not because the joke was extraordinary, because it felt ordinary, and after everything they had experienced together, ordinary felt surprisingly comforting. Their conversations remained simple. Neither searched for excuses to message the other every hour. Neither tried to impress the other. Some days they exchanged nothing more than an article about advances in medical technology. Other days they discussed books, community projects, or the STEM students they had recently mentored. Occasionally an entire week passed without a single message. Neither felt the need to force momentum. Friendship doesn't become stronger because people talk constantly. It becomes stronger because silence never feels uncomfortable. Inside Harper Neurologistics, nothing about their professional behavior changed. Leadership meetings remained professional. Emails stayed concise. Major decisions followed the same transparent procedures established after the restructuring. When discussions involved operations, Elliot listened to presentations alongside every other executive. Questions came through the proper reporting channels. Recommendations moved through committee review. No exceptions. Employees noticed something important. If they happened to see Elliot and Alana speaking after a meeting, the conversations looked exactly like every other professional discussion taking place in the building. The rumors had disappeared. Not because people forgot, because there was nothing left to feed them. The company's new culture had quietly replaced suspicion with accountability. Outside work, their friendship slowly found its own rhythm. One Saturday they volunteered together again. Another weekend they attended a public lecture at Georgia Tech about artificial intelligence in healthcare. Afterward they walked several blocks before realizing neither had looked at a phone in almost 2 hours. "You know," Alana said, "I used to think every free evening had to be productive." What changed? Watched my brother almost lose his life. Her voice remained calm. "Sin, what question? Will I remember this day 5 years from now?" Elliot considered her answer. "And?" "I don't think anyone remembers answering one more email." He smiled. "I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago." She looked at him. "Would you have listened?" He laughed quietly. "Probably not." Their conversations gradually moved beyond work. One afternoon they stopped at a neighborhood cafe after a volunteer event. Without realizing it, they remained there nearly 3 hours. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite teachers, books that had changed the way they thought, mistakes they wished they hadn't made, successes that hadn't felt as satisfying as they expected. At one point, Alana asked a question she had never considered asking before. Do you ever miss the person you were before you started the company? Elliot didn't answer immediately. I miss having fewer responsibilities. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. But I don't miss having less purpose. She nodded. I understand that. What about you? What do you mean? Before your father passed away. She looked out the window for a moment. I miss how easily I laughed. The honesty of the answer surprised both of them. A few seconds later she smiled. I think it's coming back. Elliot smiled too. I've noticed. Not long afterward, Alana invited Elliot to a Sunday family dinner. She almost changed her mind twice before sending the message. Would you like to come for dinner this weekend? My mother keeps asking about the man who stayed at the hospital with us. His reply arrived a few minutes later. I'd be honored. The Pierce family home looked exactly as Elliot remembered from the morning he had dropped Alana off after the hospital. Only this visit felt entirely different. The tension had disappeared. The front door opened before he reached it. Mason greeted him with a broad smile. Good to see you again. It's good to see you standing. Mason laughed. My doctors say I complain too much. I believe them. I only complain on weekdays. That sounds very reasonable. Both laughed. Inside, Alana's mother welcomed him warmly. I've wanted to thank you properly for months. There really isn't any need. There is. She gently touched his arm. My family would never have forgotten who stayed with my daughter that night. Elliot looked briefly toward Alana. I didn't do anything extraordinary. You stayed. Her mother smiled softly. People remember who stays. The words lingered in the room, not because they were dramatic, because they were true. Dinner unfolded naturally. Mason talked enthusiastically about coaching youth basketball. Alana teased him about becoming stricter than his own former coach. Her mother laughed more than Elliot expected. The house carried something he hadn't experienced in quite a while. Simple family warmth, nothing expensive, nothing elaborate, just people genuinely enjoying one another's company. When dessert arrived, Mason leaned toward Elliot. I have to ask. What? Who wins arguments at your office? Elliot looked toward Alana. We don't really argue. Mason looked disappointed. That's boring. Alana laughed. We debate. That's the same thing. It isn't. It definitely is. Even Elliot laughed. You may actually have a point. The evening ended with promises to visit again. Driving home, Elliot realized something that surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he had enjoyed dinner so much, not because of the food, because nobody there cared that he was a CEO. To them, he was simply someone who had been kind when their family needed kindness. It felt unexpectedly freeing. Over the following months, Elliot slowly rediscovered parts of his own life he had neglected. He accepted invitations he once would have declined. He resumed weekend hiking trips he had abandoned years earlier. He volunteered more often. He even took his first full vacation in almost a decade after his executive assistant threatened to schedule it herself if he refused. When he returned, people noticed something different. He smiled more easily. He delegated more confidently. He listened with greater patience. Leadership no longer consumed every part of his identity. Alana quietly noticed the change before anyone mentioned it. You look rested, she said after a strategy meeting. I almost didn't recognize myself. I think your staff appreciates it. I think I do too. Time continued moving gently rather than dramatically. No grand declarations interrupted their friendship. No sudden romance appeared overnight. Instead, trust deepened one conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time, one ordinary Saturday after another. That pace suited both of them. Neither wanted to build something based on excitement alone. They wanted something steady, something honest. One evening, after another successful community STEM event, several volunteers gathered for dinner. As everyone prepared to leave, one of the organizers smiled while looking between Elliot and Alana.
So,
the question came with harmless curiosity. How long have you two been dating? For a brief moment, both looked at each other. Neither answered immediately. Neither rushed to explain. And somehow, their shared silence revealed they both understood the answer mattered more than either of them had expected. The question lingered in the air. So, how long have you two been dating? Neither Elliot nor Alana answered immediately, not because they were embarrassed, because the question forced both of them to acknowledge something they hadn't yet discussed. One of the volunteers laughed awkwardly. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. Alana smiled warmly. It's all right. We're friends. The volunteer nodded apologetically. I've seen you volunteering together a few times. I guess I connected the dots, Elliot answered gently. I understand why. The conversation moved naturally to another topic, but neither Elliot nor Alana spoke much during the drive home. Not because anything was wrong, because both were quietly thinking about the same question. The following afternoon, Elliot sent a message. Would you like to take a walk after work tomorrow? A few minutes later, Alana replied, I'd like that. The next evening, they met at a public park not far from downtown Atlanta. There were no reservations, no expensive restaurant, no carefully planned evening designed to impress anyone, just a walking trail circling a quiet lake where families, runners, and dog walkers moved at their own pace. For several minutes, they talked about ordinary things, a new hospital partnership, Mason's latest coaching stories, the upcoming STEM competition. Eventually, Elliot smiled. I've been thinking about yesterday. So have I. I'm glad you answered before I did. She laughed softly. Were you? I was. Why? Because I didn't want either of us to feel pressured into defining something we haven't actually discussed. She nodded. I felt the same way. They continued walking. The evening breeze stirred the trees around the lake. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. Life continued quietly around them. After another few moments, Alana spoke. I've been asking myself something. What, if we had met under different circumstances? She looked toward the water. Would we have become friends sooner? Elliot thought carefully before answering. I honestly don't know. You don't? We met exactly when life placed us in each other's path. He smiled. I've stopped trying to rewrite timing. She appreciated the answer. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't rehearsed. It simply felt true. They reached a small bench overlooking the lake. Neither suggested leaving. Instead, they sat down. For a while, they simply watched the reflections dancing across the water. Finally, Elliot broke the silence. I owe you something. She turned toward him. What? An apology. Her eyebrows lifted. For what? For not recognizing sooner how isolated you felt. You couldn't have known. I noticed something was changing inside the company. He looked down briefly. I should have asked more questions earlier. You did ask. Not soon enough. She shook her head gently. No. He looked back at her. The people spreading rumors made their own choices. You weren't responsible for those. He smiled faintly. You always make it difficult to blame myself. Someone has to. Both laughed. The laughter faded into another comfortable silence. After a few minutes, Alana spoke again. I've never told you something. I'm listening. The night at the hospital. She paused. I wasn't only afraid of losing Mason. Elliot remained quiet. I was afraid I'd fail my family. You never did. I know that now. She looked at him. But fear doesn't usually listen to reason. He nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. What about you? She asked. What were you afraid of? He answered honestly. That I had forgotten how to be present for another human being. She looked surprised. What do you mean? For years. My answer to almost every problem became work. He smiled sadly. I convinced myself that building a better company was enough. It wasn't. It mattered. He looked toward the lake. But people matter first. The sentence settled quietly between them. It perfectly described both of them. She had spent years putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own. He had spent years believing responsibility ended with leadership. Both had learned something different. The sun had nearly disappeared below the trees when Elliot turned toward her. I don't want to rush anything. Neither do I. I don't want what happened at work to become the reason we think we're supposed to be together. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. You were? I've worked too hard rebuilding my career. And I've worked too hard rebuilding trust. She laughed softly. So we're both being careful. I think careful is underrated. She nodded. I agree. Another quiet moment passed. Then Elliot asked the question that mattered. Would you let me take you to dinner? Alana smiled before answering. As friends? As two people discovering whether friendship might become something more? She thought for only a second. I'd like that. Their first official date happened the following Friday evening. Neither chose the city's most expensive restaurant. Instead, they returned to Buckhead, not to the rooftop where everything had changed months earlier, to a small neighborhood restaurant a few blocks away. Neither mentioned that choice until after they were seated. Alana looked around. You avoided the rooftop. I did. On purpose? Yes, she smiled. I appreciate that. I wanted tonight to belong to us, not to old memories. Throughout dinner, they laughed more than either expected. They debated whether artificial intelligence would ever replace genuinely good teachers. They disagreed about the best way to encourage teenagers to pursue engineering careers. They shared embarrassing stories from their first jobs. At one point, Elliot admitted he once accidentally deleted an important presentation the night before meeting investors. Alana laughed so hard she nearly spilled her water. I needed that. So did I. There were no dramatic declarations, no cinematic speeches, only two people discovering how easy conversation could become when trust already existed. Over the following months, their relationship developed exactly as their friendship had. Slowly, deliberately. They continued volunteering, continued respecting each other's work, continued protecting healthy boundaries inside Harper Neural Logistics. No hidden meetings, no special treatment, no shortcuts. Employees gradually became aware they were spending time together outside work. This time, no one questioned anyone's integrity. The company structure made that impossible. Their actions made it believable. One Sunday afternoon, Elliot joined the Pierce family for another meal. As everyone helped clear the table afterward, Mason leaned against the kitchen counter and smiled knowingly. So, Elliot laughed immediately. I know that look. I've been practicing it. I'm sure you have. Mason glanced toward his sister, who was helping their mother wash dishes. You make her happy. Elliot followed his gaze. So does your family. Mason nodded. That's why I'm telling you. He lowered his voice slightly. Take good care of each other. Elliot answered without hesitation. That's exactly what I intend to do. A few moments later, Alana's mother joined them. She had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand its meaning. She smiled at both of them. I spent months thanking Elliot for staying with my daughter during one difficult night. She looked from one to the other. Today I'm thankful for something else. What? Alana asked. You both waited. Neither responded immediately. Her mother continued. You waited until respect came before romance. You waited until trust came before promises. She smiled warmly. That's usually how relationships last. No one argued, because deep down, they all knew she was right. Later that evening, as Elliot drove home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Alana. Thank you for today. He smiled and replied. No, thank you for trusting me enough to let today happen. Neither of them knew that their relationship would soon influence Harper Neural Logistics in a way neither had ever expected. Not because of gossip, not because of scandal, but because the company had learned that protecting integrity should never depend on good intentions alone. Soon, those lessons would become permanent policy. Nearly a year had passed since the investigation that changed Harper Neural Logistics. The company had grown. New hospital systems had joined its network. Its artificial intelligence platform now supported emergency logistics across several southeastern states. Awards arrived. Industry publications praised its innovation. Healthcare leaders requested presentations about predictive logistics. From the outside, Harper Neural Logistics looked like another successful technology company enjoying rapid expansion. Inside the building, however, people understood that its greatest change had never been technological. It had been cultural. The lesson had come at a painful cost. No one wanted to pay that price again. One Monday morning, the executive leadership team gathered in the main boardroom. Unlike many previous meetings, there were no financial projections covering the screens. No sales forecasts, no implementation schedules. Instead, one sentence appeared across the presentation. Trust deserves systems, not assumptions. Elliot looked around the room before speaking. A year ago, this company learned something difficult. No one interrupted. We discovered that having good people isn't enough. Several leaders nodded quietly. We also need good processes. He paused. Integrity shouldn't depend on personalities. It should be protected by policy. The room remained silent. Not because anyone disagreed, because everyone remembered exactly why they were there. The Human Resources Director stood and introduced the proposal that had been developed over several months. We're recommending a new ethics framework. The first slide appeared. Respect before assumption policy. Every employee would receive mandatory training explaining the difference between reporting genuine concerns and spreading unverified speculation. Real concerns deserved immediate attention. Rumors did not. Employees would learn how to recognize the difference before assumptions harmed another person's reputation. The second proposal followed. Responsible communication standards. Managers would receive specialized training on responding to workplace speculation without amplifying it. The goal wasn't to silence questions. The goal was to encourage questions to reach the right people instead of the nearest lunch table. Another slide appeared. Confidential reporting education. Employees would learn when anonymous reporting systems should be used and when simple conversations could solve misunderstandings before they became larger problems. The emphasis remained on responsibility, not fear. The discussion lasted most of the morning. Department leaders contributed ideas drawn from their own experiences. One engineering manager suggested regular ethics workshops using realistic workplace scenarios. A client services director proposed communication guidelines for situations involving personal emergencies. Another executive recommended clearer procedures whenever senior leaders needed to assist employees during family crises. Each suggestion focused on one principle: transparency. Nobody wanted another employee to wonder whether kindness might someday become a source of suspicion. The board approved every recommendation. Implementation began immediately. Over the following months, Harper Neurologistics introduced something unusual. Ethics became part of professional development instead of a once-a-year compliance presentation. New employees practiced difficult conversations during orientation. Managers learned how quickly assumptions could spread when information was incomplete. Leadership workshops emphasized accountability over authority. Instead of asking, "Who's responsible?" the company began asking, "What system allowed this to happen?" That small change transformed countless discussions. People stopped searching for someone to blame. They started searching for better solutions. The changes extended beyond training. Communication itself evolved. Whenever emergencies affected employees, leadership developed respectful ways to protect privacy while preventing unnecessary confusion, not by revealing confidential information, but by acknowledging when unusual circumstances existed. Employees learned that silence sometimes creates unnecessary uncertainty. Careful communication, handled ethically, could protect both dignity and trust. The company also created a cross-functional ethics review committee. Its members represented different departments rather than only senior leadership. Recommendations regarding workplace fairness no longer depended on one office or one title. Every significant concern received independent review, exactly as Elliot had hoped. Trust had become visible. Months later, Harper Neurologistics welcomed its largest group of new employees since winning the Southeastern Integrated Hospital Network contract. Orientation took place inside the company's largest training room. Fresh notebooks rested on every table. New hires chatted excitedly about their first day. Many had relocated from other states. Some had left secure positions elsewhere because they admired the company's mission. The orientation schedule listed technology demonstrations, department introductions, benefits information, hospital partnerships. Then one final session caught everyone's attention: building a culture of integrity. The presenter wasn't listed. Several new employees wondered who would lead it. Minutes before the session began, the Human Resources Director approached Alana. We've rewritten this presentation several times," she smiled, "but policies alone don't teach people why integrity matters." Alana waited. "We'd like you to tell the story behind the policies." "My story? Our company's story?" Alana hesitated. She had never enjoyed becoming the center of attention. "I don't know if I'm the right person." The HR director smiled kindly. "You're exactly the right person. Why? Because you never wanted any of this to happen. And that's precisely why people will believe you." Alana looked toward the orientation room where dozens of new employees were taking their seats. She thought about the hospital, the rumors, the resignation letter still tucked away inside a drawer at home, the investigation, everything that had changed since then. Finally, she smiled. "I'll do it." As the doors opened and the newest members of Harper Neurologistics settled into their seats, Alana walked toward the front of the room, completely unaware that the next 20 minutes would become the most remembered orientation speech the company had ever given. The training room gradually became quiet. Nearly 60 new employees sat around circular tables, notebooks open, company welcome packets neatly arranged in front of them. Some looked excited, others looked nervous. A few had relocated across the country to accept positions at Harper Neurologistics. They were eager to learn how one of the nation's fastest-growing healthcare logistics companies operated. Most expected presentations about software, artificial intelligence, supply chains, hospital partnerships. They weren't expecting something much more personal. The Human Resources Director stepped to the front of the room. "Before we continue today's orientation, I'd like to introduce someone who represents the values we hope every employee carries into this company." She smiled toward the side of the room. "Please welcome our Senior Vice President of Operations, Alana Pierce." Polite applause filled the room. Alana walked to the front carrying only a small notebook. She placed it on the podium, then closed it. She realized she didn't need notes. Not for this. She looked around the room. Every face was unfamiliar. Every career was just beginning inside these walls. For a brief moment she remembered her own first day. She'd been nervous then, too. She smiled warmly. "Good morning." The room answered together. "Good morning. I was originally given a presentation." A few people laughed softly. "I promise I'm not going to use it." The laughter grew a little louder. "I'd rather tell you a story." The room settled immediately. Not because anyone had been instructed to pay attention, because stories have a way of reaching people differently than policies ever can. "When I first joined Harper Neurologistics," Alana began, "I believed success depended almost entirely on competence." She paused. "I thought if I worked hard enough, prepared thoroughly enough, and treated people fairly enough, everything else would take care of itself." She smiled gently. "I eventually learned that life is more complicated than that." The room remained completely still. "A few years ago, my younger brother experienced a medical emergency." Several people instinctively leaned forward. "I received the phone call during a company celebration." She didn't describe the rumors. "Not yet. I left immediately. Our CEO, Elliot Harper, insisted on driving me to the hospital." She looked around the room. "He stayed with me through the entire night while my brother underwent emergency surgery." No one interrupted. No speeches. No dramatic promises. He simply stayed. She smiled faintly. Sometimes kindness is wonderfully ordinary. She took a slow breath before continuing. "The next morning, we returned to work." She looked toward the audience. "We were exhausted. We had been awake all night." She paused. "The problem wasn't what happened. The problem was what people believed happened." Several employees exchanged thoughtful glances. "I learned something difficult. When people don't have information, they often create it." The room grew even quieter. "Within days, rumors spread across the company. I discovered something painful." She looked down briefly before raising her eyes again. "Your reputation isn't built only by what you do. It's also influenced by what people choose to believe." No bitterness entered her voice, only honesty. "I considered resigning." The admission surprised several people. "I honestly believed leaving would protect the company." She smiled. "Our CEO refused to accept my resignation, not because he favored me, not because he wanted to avoid embarrassment. He refused because he believed something I had almost forgotten." She paused. "The truth deserves a chance to speak before fear makes permanent decisions." The room remained silent for several seconds. Not uncomfortable silence, reflective silence. Alana rested one hand lightly on the podium. "The investigation eventually proved exactly where we had been. At the hospital. My brother recovered. Our names were cleared." She looked around the room. "But something important stayed with me." She stepped away from the podium slightly. "I realized integrity doesn't mean people will never misunderstand you. It means you'll never have to invent a different version of your story." Several employees quietly wrote those words into their notebooks. Alana noticed. She smiled. "If you remember only one thing from today, remember this: protect other people's reputations as carefully as you protect your own." The sentence settled deeply across the room. If you hear something that could damage another person's career, ask yourself one question: do I know this is true? If the answer is no, don't become the next person to repeat it. She looked from table to table. One conversation can damage trust. One decision can protect it. Every person in the room listened without distraction, not because company policy required attention, because they recognized they weren't hearing a lecture. They were hearing someone's life. Questions followed naturally. One new employee raised her hand. If someone genuinely believes something inappropriate is happening, what should they do? Alana nodded approvingly. "That's an important question. Use the reporting systems the company provides." She smiled. "Not the lunchroom." Gentle laughter spread across the room. She continued. "Responsible reporting protects people. Rumors protect no one." Another employee spoke. "Were you angry with the people who believed the rumors?" Alana thought carefully before answering. "I was hurt." She admitted it openly. But anger wouldn't have repaired anything. What helped was watching people accept responsibility once they learned the truth. She smiled softly. Some apologized, some didn't. I couldn't control either response. I could only decide what kind of person I wanted to remain. The room became thoughtful again. Near the back of the room sat Elliot Harper. He had quietly entered several minutes after the presentation began and taken an empty seat without interrupting. He wore no name badge announcing he was the CEO. No one introduced him. Most of the new employees had been too focused on Alana's words to notice he had arrived. He listened without speaking, without correcting, without adding anything. Watching her stand confidently before the room filled him with quiet pride, not because she mentioned him, because she never made herself the hero. She spoke about responsibility, humility, truth, exactly as she had lived them. When the presentation ended, the room remained silent for one brief moment. Then every new employee stood. The applause wasn't loud because someone important had finished speaking. It was heartfelt because everyone understood they had just been trusted with something genuine. Alana looked almost embarrassed by the standing ovation. She smiled and thanked everyone before stepping away from the podium. As people slowly gathered their materials, Elliot quietly slipped out of the room through the back entrance. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't interrupt the conversations beginning around her. This moment belonged to her, not to him. Weeks later, new employees were still talking about that orientation session. Some remembered the policies. Most remembered the story. Years passed. The company continued growing. New leaders emerged. New hospitals joined the network. Technology evolved. But every orientation still ended with the same lesson. Not because it appeared in a handbook, because one story had quietly become part of the company's identity. And years later, one unexpected question would bring every memory rushing back. 5 years later, Atlanta looked different. New hospitals had joined the Harper Neurologistics Network. The company had expanded into additional regions across the country. Its predictive logistics platform now helped healthcare systems prepare for hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms, and unexpected medical emergencies with greater accuracy than anyone had imagined during its early years. The company had grown. Its people had grown with it. What hadn't changed was the culture. Every employee, from interns to senior executives, understood one simple expectation: respect people enough to verify the truth before repeating a story. It wasn't just a policy anymore. It had become part of the company's identity. Life had continued moving forward for everyone. Mason had finished college and now worked as a youth athletic development coordinator, helping teenagers safely participate in sports while educating families about the same medical condition that had nearly taken his own life years earlier. Instead of allowing one frightening night to define him, he allowed it to shape the kind of person he became. Alana's mother often joked that he talked even more now than he had as a child. He always smiled and answered, "I've got a lot more to be thankful for." Alana continued leading operations with the same quiet confidence that had always defined her. Success never changed her character. She still visited every department, still learned new employees' names, still walked through the operations center instead of remaining behind closed office doors. When people congratulated her on the company's continued success, she usually redirected the praise. "No one moves a hospital system alone." That answer never changed. Neither did the respect people had for her. Elliot also looked different than he once had, not because of age, because balance had finally become part of his life. He no longer believed leadership required sacrificing every personal relationship. He still worked hard, still expected excellence, still protected the mission that inspired Harper Neurologistics from the beginning. But he also protected something he had almost forgotten before that night at Grady Memorial Hospital. Time. Time with people who mattered. Time away from conference rooms. Time to live a life instead of simply managing one. Looking back, he sometimes realized the company had not been the only thing transformed by one unexpected evening. He had been transformed too. One autumn afternoon, Harper Neurologistics celebrated another milestone. The company had been recognized nationally for excellence in ethical leadership and organizational culture. Employees gathered in the same conference center where years earlier they had celebrated winning the Southeastern Integrated Hospital Network contract. The atmosphere felt entirely different now. There were no whispers, no uncertain glances, no invisible walls separating coworkers, only genuine pride. Former employees had returned for the celebration. Hospital administrators attended. Community partners filled several tables. The STEM mentorship program displayed photographs from projects completed over the previous 5 years. Among them was one picture showing Elliot and Alana helping a group of middle school students build small robots. Neither had even known the photograph had been taken. It quietly reminded them how much life had changed. After the ceremony, guests gathered in small groups, enjoying refreshments and conversations that stretched well into the afternoon. Alana stepped away for a moment, carrying a cup of coffee toward a quieter corner of the room. She had barely taken a sip when a young woman approached her. "Excuse me." Alana turned and smiled. "Of course. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." The young woman looked slightly nervous. I joined the company 3 months ago. It's nice to meet you. I attended your orientation. Alana laughed softly. Then we've already met once. In a way. The young employee hesitated before asking, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can. If you'd rather not answer, I completely understand." Alana nodded. "Go ahead." The young woman shifted her coffee cup from one hand to the other. "I've heard different versions of a story over the years." She smiled apologetically. "I figured I should ask the only person who actually knows." Alana waited patiently. The question finally came. "So, is it true you almost quit because of office gossip?" For a brief moment, everything became wonderfully quiet, not because the room had emptied, because the question carried her back through years of memories. The rooftop celebration, the flashing lights outside the emergency room, the hospital waiting area, the resignation letter still tucked safely inside a keepsake box at home, the investigation, the difficult conversations, the apology she never expected, the lessons that followed. She smiled, not with sadness, with gratitude. "No." The young employee looked slightly surprised. "No?" Alana gently shook her head. "I almost quit because I thought other people's opinions mattered more than the truth." The young woman remained silent. Alana continued, "It took me a while to understand something. You can't control what people imagine. You can't control every conversation. You can't control every misunderstanding." She smiled kindly. "But you can control whether your own actions give you peace when the day is over." The young employee nodded slowly. "I don't think I'll forget that. I hope you never have to learn it the difficult way. So do I." They shared a quiet smile before the young employee returned to the celebration. A few moments later, Elliot joined Elena near the window overlooking downtown Atlanta. "I recognize that look," she smiled. "Which one?" "The one that says someone just asked about the story." She laughed. "They did. What did you tell them?" "The truth." He nodded. "The same truth, the only one there has ever been." For a few seconds they simply watched employees laughing together across the room. Finally Elliot spoke. "You know, if I had signed that resignation letter," she looked toward him, "this company wouldn't be what it is today." She gently shook her head. "It wasn't because you refused to sign it." He looked curious. "No? It was because you refused to let assumptions become policy." He smiled. "And you refused to let pain change who you were." They stood quietly together, not needing to say anything else. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations end without another sentence. As the celebration continued, dozens of employees walked past without giving the two of them a second glance. Years earlier, that would have been impossible. Today, it was completely ordinary. No whispers, no speculation, no one searching for hidden meaning. Just two respected leaders standing together after years of earning the trust of the people around them. Perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not that the rumors had disappeared, but that the culture had changed enough to prevent them from taking root again. Because stories travel quickly, assumptions travel even faster. But character walks patiently, quietly, one decision at a time. Some lies disappear when the facts finally come to light. Others leave scars that remind us to choose our words more carefully. But integrity has one advantage that gossip will never possess. It never has to remember what it said.